Welcome to the No BS Spiritual Book Club's live streaming interview series, where leading new thought teachers, speakers, and authors share the intimate stories behind the 10 best spiritual books that inspired them the most on their spiritual journey. From well-known classics to hidden gems you might never have heard of, the No BS Spiritual Book Club saves you time and money by sharing reliable recommendations from those who've walked the path before you. The No BS Spiritual Book Club, the only No BS guide to the best spiritual books to inspire your own journey of self-discovery. Here's your host, founder of the No BS Spiritual Book Club, Sandie Sedgbeer.
Hello and welcome. Hybrids, star people, dragons, elementals, leprechauns, and keys to our spiritual evolution. These are just some of the topics explored and explained in the books of today's guest, spiritual transformation teacher, mystic, and author Tanis Helliwell, who's seen and heard elementals, angels, and master teachers in higher dimensions since early childhood. A psychotherapist by training and a former management consultant to major corporations, including IBM, Tanis Helliwell is the founder of the International Institute for Transformation, IIT, which offers courses in spiritual transformation. She's presented at conferences alongside such New Thought luminaries as Rupert Sheldrake, Matthew Fox, Gregg Braden, Jean Houston, etc. And she has also led tours and walking pilgrimages to sacred sites for over 20 years. And before I introduce her, here's a question to ponder as we move through today's show. So, you think you're human, do you? And I want you to pay attention to what was revealed to Tanis Helliwell in the last book on her 10 best list. Tanis Helliwell, welcome.
Well, thanks for having me, Sandie. What a treat.
Treat for me too, Tanis. So you spent a good part of your childhood in the library reading, and you like to say that in your early life, you were not exposed to spiritual books per se, but you were moved spiritually by other books. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yes, my parents were quite poor. They had a hardware store and they worked all the time. So we were left, my younger brother and I, alone. So every Saturday, Mom would just give me some money and off we would go to the library. And my brother would choose his books, I would choose mine. So I was choosing books with nobody to help me, nobody to filter. And so I was quite young when I read a book by Lawrence Vanderpost.
Okay, well, don't tell us about that yet. We're going to get to that when we start talking about the list. But you were very, very struck with science fiction as a child and fantasy and also historical fiction, weren't you?
Yes, I did. I liked Frank G. Slaughter. I have no idea what has happened to these people. And Thomas B. Costain. These were books that I was reading, historical fiction. I could almost see myself in those periods, Sandie. And I think this might happen to a lot of people who read historical fiction, that they either fantasize that they were in those periods or they, in fact, in a past life were in those periods.
I think we've all resonated to some piece of history and said, wow, that sounds really real to me.
Yes, very much so. Yeah.
Well, your books today, you have listed them in the order that you read them in your life from childhood up till now. And you say that it wasn't particularly difficult to choose the 10. Why was it not difficult?
It wasn't difficult because I didn't have anybody on my shoulder saying, that's not a spiritual book. Because quite often when you're thinking, oh, it has to be spiritual, you go to your bookcase now and you think, okay, what am I still reading? But that isn't necessarily what would move a child. And so I wanted to focus on actually what moves a child. And is Peter Pan not a spiritual book? Does that not move a child? thinking of themselves being able to fly.
Mm. You know, you're absolutely right. And really, it's about the books that inspired you as opposed to, strictly spiritual. It's any book that moved you, opened up your mind to something, shifted your perceptions perhaps on the world. So that's really what we're all about. But you're right. There are so many children's books that actually do that. They're all teaching you something.
They do. They do. Fairy tales. I mean, fairy tales are wonderful at this, and not just opening up our mind, but opening up our heart. And that was more important for me because I often say, Sandie, that there's three qualities that we all need to be creators, and one's love, one's wisdom, and one's will. Well, I came into this world with will. No, I didn't have that. Wisdom, that was my big one. And heart is the one I have been working on my whole life. So yeah, that was my first book, was one that opened up my heart.
Mm. And that was The Lost World of the Kalahari by Lawrence van der Post, published in 1958. And you had a real visceral reaction to this, didn't you?
I did. When I read about the Bushmen and how they were, almost going extinct, and that they had Mongolian. Here they are in Africa. They have Mongolian features. They're only 5 foot tall. Their skin is even more Oriental, and they don't walk. They run everywhere after their game, and he wrote, because he himself was a South African, and he went on an expedition to find them. And I was so moved by this story of these people, being forced to die out in our world. And there's another Canadian author by the name of Farley Mowat who wrote a book, People of the Deer, that I read about the same time. And I wrote to both these authors. And I'm a preteen, and I'm just sobbing and writing to them. And they never wrote back. And they were both alive at that time. And something in me has changed because of that. Because if anybody emails me, writes to me, I write back.
I used to do that as well when I was a teenager, and I used to get answers. And I wrote to one person, and I wish I could find the letter, but it was a wonderful author called Georgette Heyer, and she was the person in England back in the 70s and 80s who brought Regency books set in the Regency era. So Bridgerton, it's very much based on that era. And she wrote me a beautiful letter. And it was just so nice for, a young teenager to actually hear from an author whose work they valued. So you're absolutely right. It is important. It is important to answer anyone who writes to you.
Mm-hmm. I think so too. That's wonderful. You received an answer.
I did. I think I received an answer from all of the people not that I wrote to loads, but there were a handful, and I think I got answers to all of them. Mind you, that was long before the days of email.
Mm-hmm.
People had to sit down and write letters.
True.
Yeah.
Well,
so book number 2, Childhood's End by Arthur C. Clarke, published in 1953. And this was his first successful novel. And of course, it's considered a classic now.
Yes, it is. It's a science fiction classic. And this introduced me to the whole realm of science fiction. And because I was a mystic, even as a child, I saw what people didn't see. I heard different voices. I felt different things. And so learning that, there's this whole realm of science fiction out there where people are talking about other worlds, other evolutions, and other evolutions who are wanting to come to the earth and work with humanity. And it's so strange that I would pick that book to talk to you about today, because it was my first. But then, as you know, many years later, I wrote that book, Hybrid, So You Think You're Human. And one of the beings that turns out to be the beings of the oversoul that come to Earth are one of those hybrids.
Mm.
So, you know how patterns repeat ourselves. And yeah, and we'll have something that impacts us at one point, and there'll be a fractal, a
Yeah.
repeating pattern in our life.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. Yeah. And we look back later on and go, aha, now I understand what that was all about.
Yeah, yeah.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
and you asked, one of the questions you asked when I was completing these forms was, would you recommend each of these books to people? And I said, well, not I can't really recommend this book because you'd have to be a science fiction fan to like it. And I don't even know now if it is well written. And
Mm.
that didn't matter when I was young. You didn't have a criteria for that.
No, no. I think it's not important if the book is well written, if the information in it, and I've read books that are technically not well written, but oh boy, they're worth reading for the information.
Aha.
Yeah. So, the next book, number 3, Four Quartets by the poet, dramatist, and literary critic T.S. Eliot, published in 1943.
Well, the reason I've got that one on my list is because I was in university and I was in my 4th year of an English major. And I was introduced to this poem. And it so impacted me because it's really the story of going through the dark night of the soul. And Eliot is doing it in a Christian mysticism kind of way. And he's writing it when the war is still going on, Second World War still going
Mm.
on. So
Mm.
it's a dark night in the world as well as a dark night in his world. And yet he published each section separately, and yet it all comes together at the end. And Sandie, could I read the end? Would that be permitted?
Sure. Yes.
Because I, in preparing for this talk, I started re-looking at all these books. And this called me again. So the very last of the book reads, we shall not cease from exploration, and the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time, through the unknown, remembered gate, when the last of earth left to discover is that which was the beginning. Yeah. And that still really moves me. I mean, he goes on from there, but it really moves me because now that I'm in my senior years, I am too very contemplative and reflective and looking back to the beginning and to see how everything has brought me to this point. And I don't think it's just my senior years because I work so much with people going through the dark night of the soul. This seems to be a theme in my life to help people with that. And I remember a friend of mine who is a Mayan astrologer once told me, Tanis, you sit on the place of death in the Mayan astrology. And and he said it's funny because you don't have that kind of outward personality, but that's really what you do. And so the dark night of the soul and four quartets, boy, yay.
Hmm. Book number 4, Cosmic Memory, Atlantis and Lemuria by Rudolf Steiner, published in 1959.
Okay, now, have people heard about Rudolf Steiner? If you know anything about anthroposophy, then you would have heard about Rudolf Steiner because he founded Waldorf schools of education, and a lot of people have heard about that. He founded biodynamic gardening, which is more organic than organic. He founded a school of medicine. He was a philosopher. He had a PhD. So he was a mystic who was also a scientist and a scholar. And he, in his day, and we're talking, he was like 1920s to 1920s. We're talking a long time ago now. He traveled all through Europe and even to Britain in doing lecture tours. And Cosmic Memory for me was the first book, and I was in my, I think, 20s when I read that. And it was the first book that knew what I knew about Atlantis and Lemuria. I was already seeing Atlantis and Lemuria, and I didn't know any mystics. I'm, living in small town Canada, and this was the first person who spoke to me in a way that I thought, oh, there are people out there who know these things. And yet, would I recommend that book? It's written in a very arcane, old-fashioned style. So only if you want to know more about Rudolf Steiner and you want to wade through that style, I would recommend it.
Yeah. Book number 5. This is one that comes up several times, and this is one, harking back to what we spoke about earlier, that a book doesn't have to be spiritual to move you. This book, you wouldn't say it's overtly spiritual, but it's moved so many people, so especially women, who all resonate with this time. And of course, it is The Mists of Avalon by Marion Zimmer Bradley, published in 1982. One of my favorites.
Well, I'm glad that we finally come to one that made your list. And I'm wondering if any of the previous books made anybody else's list. But
Not to
I
my knowledge.
know exactly how unique we are. This is the important thing.
Yeah.
And yes, the Mists of Avalon. Well, by the time I was reading the Mists of Avalon, I was working as a management consultant by day for IBM and banks and government agencies. And that's a man's world. And reading that book was about powerful women, especially Morgane, who was spiritual, but had a great deal to do with both creating Arthur as king and then taking him down later on when he did not honor the woman, did not honor the Divine Mother. And I think right now we're at the same stage. We have, where's the honoring of the divine feminine and the earth? So I think that's a very current book, very important for women. It's also important for men because a lot of men are very attracted to the Arthurian legend. And it's good for them to see it from this yin perspective.
Yeah, I remember this. It really did impact me in a huge way, that book. Yeah, the resonance, and I know this, it didn't feel like fiction to me. It felt like history.
Well, maybe you and I were both in that time.
Maybe, maybe. I know a lot of people who feel the same.
Yes, yes. Well, maybe there's a whole group soul of us coming back right now from that, knowing that time. Yeah.
So book number 6, Pathways Through to Space, A Personal Record of Transformation in Consciousness by Franklin Merrill Wolfe, published in 1973.
Well, this book moved me for many reasons. I myself met Franklin Merrill Wolfe, and it was just before I went into retreat, giving up my business, my counseling practice, my tours, everything, to become enlightened. This was my one goal, to become enlightened. And I was introduced to Franklin Merrill Wolfe by Richard Moss, who is also an author. And he took me to meet him on a Sunday. And I was immediately catapulted into an altered state just by the presence of this man. And I'd met many spiritual people by then. I'd studied Buddhism for a long time, many great Buddhic teachers. Nobody had ever catapulted me just by their frequency. He didn't even speak. He was in his 90s by then, Sandie. So he wasn't even speaking very much. He was just sitting there, and he catapulted me. In fact, so much that when everybody else left, I was in such an altered state I couldn't drive. I couldn't get in the car. They had to feed me and wait till I returned to normality. And John Lilly wrote the introduction to his book, and a lot of people know about him. But if you go on Amazon, you'll find that, the Pathways Through to Space is maybe sold 10 or 15 copies. And this is one of the great Western mystics. So I am so happy to be able to introduce him to a wider audience. And when I went to become enlightened, I only took 3 books: the Bible, Dante's Inferno, and Pathways Through to Space. He is, Franklin Merrill Wolff had been a university professor, and his way through to enlightenment was highly mental, but he documented the entire process for us. Rather than people, one day they're not enlightened and the next day they're enlightened, and then there's this big gap. So I definitely recommend this book, especially to people who are more mentally focused.
I've never heard of him or the book. But as you say, if it's only sold a small number of copies, it wouldn't have got a massive following or much publicity. But clearly it's one that certainly needs to be looked at.
I think so.
Book number 7, A Path with Heart, A Guide Through the Perils and Promises of Spiritual Life by Jack Cornfield, 1993.
Well, as mentioned previously, learning love and compassion is my main thing. And I encountered that book. Well, first of all, he is a psychotherapist, and that was my training. And my practice for many years, 16 years I practiced. And so I liked his way of telling stories and the depth that he could talk about people's journeys. But he's also a very well-known meditation teacher. And his way of teaching is Buddhic, but it is Vipassana, which is very different from the many, many years when I studied Tibetan Buddhism with all the gods and goddesses and mantra here and mantra there. Vipassana for me came at a time when I just wanted to, oh no, not one more mantra, not one more god or goddess. I just want to strip everything away. And it's a beautiful book. It has meditations that you can do, so you could even tape them and then do them for yourself. Very commonsensical, good-humored, and I think good for anybody. It's a mainstream book. It's not one of those books that you have to have a special this or that to enjoy it.
Right, number 8. This one does come up again and again and again. No surprises there. The Untethered Soul, The Journey Beyond Yourself by Michael A. Singer, published in 2007. Extraordinary how often this book turns up on people's lists.
Isn't that interesting? It turns up more often than the last one that we just talked about.
Yeah. This is I think it's in the top 20 of all time. The most recommended books. Definitely in the top 20.
Very interesting. Yeah. I don't even know how I encountered it. But I liked the size. It was nice and small. It was slender, and I was kind of sick of big fat books. And yeah, what I loved about it, was that he writes beautifully. He's a brilliant writer, but he also writes in a kind of down-to-earth, everyday way. And he doesn't give us meditation examples like Cornfield does. He doesn't do that. But his insight into our spiritual life and especially the difficulties we are going to face, erasing old programs, our fears, all the things we have to erase, he is an expert on. And I even taught that to some of my senior students, people who had been my graduates of my institute. I taught that one year. And then the next year, I took his surrender experiment and taught that one. And his surrender experiment I like just as well as this one. Yeah.
I've not heard of the surrender experiment.
Yeah, what he did, he decided he would just say yes to everything. And in saying yes to everything, it led him going to jails to talk to inmates. It led him to founding a very, very successful company, high-tech company, things he would never have done. It led him to all these things just by saying yes. So it's really more a biography of his life. And I'll tell you one other thing that I liked about him. I saw a YouTube on him when I was interested in reading the book. And at the back was the same meditation teachers that I study with. And I didn't know that until I had actually been reading his book and studying his book, that it was the same lineage. Isn't that interesting?
Very, yeah. Well, we're going to take a short break now. You're listening to a No BS Spiritual Book Club interview, and sharing her 10 best list of most inspirational books is spiritual transformation teacher, mystic, author, and founder of the International Institute for Transformation, Tanis Helliwell, who's seen and heard elementals, angels, and master teachers in higher dimensions since childhood. We'll be back with more from Tanis Helliwell and an addendum to that question of, so you think you are human? After this break, stay tuned.
Welcome to Om Times TV.
Maya Angelou once said that there is no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside you. I'm Sandie Sedgbeer, and when I'm not hosting Om Times Media's flagship radio show What Is Going On and the No BS Spiritual Book Club, I help people share their untold stories. Books are my life, my joy and my passion, and there is no greater reward than helping aspiring writers get their books out of their heads and into the hands of those who are waiting to read them. If you feel that you have a book in you but don't know where to begin, visit sedgbeer.com, click on the Work With Me tab and find out how my experience helping others tell their stories might be just what you've been looking for. That's sedgbeer.com, sedgbeer.com.
Imagine becoming a super influencer. Reinvent yourself, invest in your brand, and then manifest your success with a robust spheric approach. Om Times Media and Broadcasting offers a unique and multifaceted way to become the spiritual and conscious influencer you deserve to be by putting your message across our powerful platform with its proven record of integrity and excellence. Through our produced shows, Om Times offers the opportunity to become a social media TV personality, a radio show host, an Om Times magazine columnist, and a syndicated podcaster, all in one shot. By live streaming your show on Om Times TV and broadcasting it across the extensive Om Times radio and TV networks, you become more than a host. You become an ambassador and a force for positive change. Om Times. Open yourself to the possibilities.
Everything that we do, we can do in a contemplative manner through the art of contemplation, you can use the gene keys in a really powerful way. Gene keys is basically the code book of life. In the gene keys, the book is made up of these three levels: shadows, gifts, and cities. And the journey is through those three levels, kind of unpicking of the shadow states, the releasing of the gifts, and then the embodying of this higher consciousness called the city. And the cities are very exalted words. And it's not like we kind of suddenly are all these exalted Christ-like beings, but we have flashes and illuminations along the journey. And the more we get stuck into the journey, the more illumination comes to us, because the more we're releasing the light from in these codes inside our DNA. So all those revelations are inside us. So the contemplative way is the inner way.
There are 16 million children struggling with hunger in America. That's 1 in 5 daughters, sons, neighbors, and classmates who don't know where their next meal is coming from. Yet billions of pounds of good food go to waste every year. It's time we do something about it. Feeding America is a nationwide network of food banks that helps provide meals to millions of kids and families in need. Visit feedingamerica.org to help them feed even more. Together, we can solve hunger. Together, we're feeding America.
Welcome back. Tanis Helliwell, book 9 on your list. This is one that does crop up, I would say, frequently, definitely not in the top 20 yet, but it's a book that is just, well, you know, it speaks for itself. I mean, the people who like it actually love it. And it is The Gene Keys, Embracing Your Higher Purpose by Richard Rudd, which was published in 2011. And I think, you know, although there's, you know, it can be quite technical, this book, and that puts some people off, just the Gene Keys themselves are such an incredible body of work. Such an incredible body of work that even if people can't read the book, they love the Gene Keys.
Yes, yeah, that's true. And well, how I was introduced to it was a friend told me about it. And I was quite tired of reading books. And she said, why don't you just go and complete your holographic profile on the Gene Keys? And it's something that people can just go onto Richard's website and complete their own profile. And I was so struck by how accurate it was. I don't know if you've done yours, Sandie. And was it accurate?
I think so, yes. Yes.
Yes. Yeah, so it was so accurate about my shadows. He divides our profile and the Gene Keys into kind of 3 areas, and he talks about the 64. It's based on the DNA and also the I Ching, but he talks about the shadow of your gene, the gift of it, and then the city of it. And that is really good, because the shadow, well, yes, this is when we're not at our best. The gift is what people see most often in us. It's what we think is our best often. And if we succeed with our gift, we think, oh, yes, you know, I'm successful. But going to the city is our genius. And what would that be if we were not limited by our old programmings and our old self-limiting thoughts? What would our real genius be? But in order to know that, we have to get over our shadow. Yes. So really an excellent book. And as you said, it is very thick. And yet you don't have to read it cover to cover. You can just pick up your own genes and look at those. And that's all that you need to do. Yeah. And very impressed, and studied all his programs online, met him. In fact, he wrote the foreword for one of my books, which is very nice, which is Good Morning, Henry, an in-depth journey with the body intelligence. So I call him the new Carl Jung. I think of him that way. I think he's brilliant.
I do too. Yeah. And a lovely, lovely man. A
He
really
is.
lovely person. Yeah.
He is. Have you interviewed him now?
Yes, and I consider him a friend. Yeah, I've
So do
interviewed him several times. In
Oh,
fact, I'm going to his, he's got an event in a couple of weeks' time in London, a weekend event that I'm going to. But yeah, no, he is one of the real deal people that we
I
have
think
the
so too.
privilege to meet. Yes. Yes.
He is the real deal, and isn't
Yes.
that great? We both consider him a friend.
Yes.
So this
Yes.
is lovely. Yeah, he's when I first went to a workshop with him, having read the book, I thought, well, this man is brilliant, but is he grounded? Is he going to be grounded? Is he going to have an open heart? And I was so impressed in the workshop, the in-person workshop, that he was so physical, he was so open in his heart, as well as so mental and so spiritual, and that is quite rare.
Yeah, it is. It is. So I encourage anybody to check out the Gene Keys. There's so much good information there, that very helpful information too. You know, I'm a great lover of anything that teaches us about ourselves, because, you know, we've got to know who we are,
Yeah.
know thyself. And, you know, when I discovered the Gene Keys, it fit very nicely into my studies of, you know, astrology and human design and everything else.
Great. Excellent.
So, book number 10 now. Do you think that you're human? Well, listen to this story. Tell us about book number 10 and what you discovered in it.
Okay. Well, it is the autobiography of a yogi, and by Paramahansa Yogananda.
Yes.
And I'm sure many people have recommended that on your list.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. And a lot of people, not just me, but a lot of people read that book when they're quite young, like in their 20s or 30s. And then they may put it down, which I did. I put it down, but I did read a lot of his talks, a lot of Paramahansa Yogananda's talks over the years. And then, you know, I continued writing. I wrote many books, and then I wrote a book called, as you're saying, Hybrid. So You Think You're Human, which talks about the possibility that there are 22 evolutions, which are evolving here on the planet, including dragons and mer people and whatever. So, and this was, you know, quite a way out book for me to write. And then I think it was a Christmas holiday, and I decided, oh, what will I do? Oh, I think I will read the autobiography of a yogi. And I come to 2/3 of the way through, and Paramahansa Yogananda is talking about his guru, who is Sri Yukteswar, and he's dead. He's dead, and he's appeared to Paramahansa Yogananda physically, just like Christ. And, you know, there are beings who do reappear physically after death. So he appears, and Paramahansa Yogananda speaks to him for a few hours and says, "What are you doing now?" And he said, "I am working in the high astral realm with people who are working on their last astral incarnation." And he said, "But there's things I want you to write about that won't be important to people right now," because Paramahansa Yogananda wrote the book in, I don't know, like
46.
46, right. And, but there are people coming where this will be important. And then he said that exact thing. He said, "In this realm, there are mer people and dragons and gnomes." And I thought, my God, it's my life. You know, I've written all these books on elementals. He must have been overseeing that all those years. And, you know, it's quite unbelievable. And, well, obviously that convinced me that he was my teacher, and that, so I have been I've been a devotee of Paramahansa Yogananda ever since, and probably like Singer, who has him on his altar as well. And he was an enlightened guru as well, you know.
Had you written the book Hybrids when you read that, or were you in the process of writing it?
I think I had already written the draft of it at that point. I'm pretty sure it was already the draft, if not yes, of that book when I read that. It was not before I read that.
So it's interesting that you were drawn to it at that point in time. You needed, obviously, the confirmation.
You're right. I did need the confirmation because to go out on a limb to talk about 22 possible evolutions that are evolving here on the earth, it's quite radical. And
and many people will say it's completely off the wall, very crazy. And yet, your book, Hybrids, really gives people an opportunity to look into their own lineage.
I hope so. I tried to go through all the myths of the world to show how these myths around dragons and mer people are all over the world, and these cultures who came up with them never were in any contact, and also scientific evidence. So I really did try to gather that as proof, because that's important, don't you think, Sandie, that we have to look for proof when we can. It helps people. It helps make a link between where they're at and where you're hoping they're going to be able to at least stay open. Maybe not be utterly convinced, but at least stay open to possibilities.
Absolutely. It's a requirement. You're not going to get very far without the proof, because it's too easy for people to gainsay it. So tell me, would you say that everybody alive today is a hybrid? That there've been something else, some kind of elemental, or?
Ooh, that's putting me on the spot.
It is.
Let's just say that I seem to attract a lot of people around my in my life who are hybrids, and a diversity of hybrids. In fact, one of the things I did in my book was that I went to all these various people and I said, "What I've written, does this resonate with you?" And they said, "Absolutely." And I said, "Well, could you tell your story then and write a few paragraphs in the book?" So I did that. Took true people who really thinks they are those hybrids, and there are certain predictable characteristics of certain hybrids. And so that's what I was trying to get people to look at.
Well, it's interesting over the last, couple of decades, how many people are interested in being a mermaid, and people were buying fishtails and things like that, and wanting to wear these in the water because they felt so closely attuned with mer people.
Yes, that's right. And we can be more than one evolution.
I'm sure if we've been around forever, I would think that, we've got a little bit of everything in us.
Yes, if we are a star person, we could come back from one constellation and then enter another evolution here. It's true.
Well, you wrote a book about dragons, didn't you? I
sure did. It's my latest one. I did write one. It's my latest one. And, I am told what books to write. I meditate and I'm told what books to write. And I was in meditation when I was told by one of the beings in that particular lineage, one of the gurus. of the Paramahansa Yogananda lineage that I had to write that book. And I was taken to the dragon world. I saw it.
So why must you write a book about dragons right now? Why is that relevant?
I think it's relevant because the great cosmic dragon is coming back again to help birth the earth. And that is what dragons are good at. Dragons have a gift for catalyzing the Kundalini energy, not only in a human being, but also in the actual earth, to actually catalyze a birth process. And what I was told in that book, The Dragon's Tale, is that the dragons are more concerned with the earth even than they are with humanity. Yes, they're interested in humanity because we're one of the beings here, but they are concerned with the evolution and rebirth of the earth as a conscious planet. So that is why I think I was directed to write the book, that because we need to realize that the earth is going through a rebirth, and we, being cells in the body of the earth, are also being catalyzed. So that book was fast to write, but it was also exhausting to write because the dragon realm is much higher than the elemental. It's higher than the mer people's realm, which is more astral. It is really a high mental realm. And it was a stretch for me, Sandie, to be in those realms.
Did they write the books through you? Were they dictating the book, or did you have to go and do research or meditations?
I go. It's like talking to you. We're tuned to a certain station right now, but I can turn that station off and I can tune to an astral station, or I can tune to a higher mental station. I am completely conscious. I am not a channel. But I have I'm grateful, I suppose, that I got this ability to be able to go high. I'm not a good psychic, by the way. A psychic is someone who is able to go out to the astral, the lower astral, and purvey all of this, go out broad. But I'm not. I'm more like a medium that goes straight up to the soul, to these high realms. So that is what I do. And I used to keep this secret, Sandie. I kept this secret for decades and decades and decades. Yeah, because you just look like you're an ordinary person going through the world, and you are an ordinary person going through the world. We all have to master how to pay our bills and drive our car. And and I spent 5 decades mastering that, but I had this inner world. I've always had this inner world.
So you also have written a book about leprechauns.
I have many.
Many.
Those were my many first books.
So tell me about leprechauns.
Okay. I first met my leprechaun family when I went to Ireland to become enlightened. So I'm only in my 30s. And I always thought my work was with human beings, to be a therapist, to help with developed consciousness of humans. I walk into this cottage and there's this whole leprechaun family. And this is, they told the man, the little man, if you like, he doesn't like to be called the little man. He prefers to be called himself. But he taught me all about elementals. and how elementals build all the form here on the earth. And that without them, we'd have no trees, no food to eat, no mountains, no water, no air. So he said, at the end of it, he said, I want you to write a book about this in 10 years. And I thought, how the heck am I going to remember all this in 10 years? He said, well, I'll be with you. I'll be with you, Lash. And so we've had 3 decades now together. We've written several books. And Sri Yukteswar, those were one of the ones that he talked about in the autobiography of a yogi, were the gnomes. So the elementals, the leprechauns, live just a little bit higher frequency than us. And this is why people are starting to see them, hear them, want to work with them. The reason they told me I had to wait 10 years is because people didn't even believe in angels then. And angels had to come first for people to then move towards, hey, what about this other possibility, elementals?
So what are leprechauns?
They are a gnome. They are earth-based. If people get a friendly elemental to work with, which I try to help people do, they may get a leprechaun, a goblin, a brownie, something earth-based, because they are more solid and people can identify more with them. So although they come from Ireland, they can travel in space and time. All elementals can. So he can come here for a cup of tea. He can go to London to see you, or he can, go to Australia. In fact, he does travel a lot to gather other elementals that want to work with humans. That's his work, and that's my work with him, is to do that.
So what kind of work are people doing with leprechauns?
Well, it's important to, just like people have a guardian angel, and they want to work with the angel to create a better world with more peace and more harmony and more mercy and more compassion. Well, these are all qualities of angels. But with elementals, with leprechauns, what they're interested is healing the earth. How do we get co-creators that want to partner, human and elementals, to heal the earth, to have organic gardens, to gather up trash, to not pollute? So in very concrete, practical ways, and Lloyd, my leprechaun friend, is extremely practical.
Tell me about the high beings of Hawaii. That was the title of one of your books.
That was, I guess that's the 3rd book that I wrote with Lloyd. I went on a holiday to Hawaii wanting a vacation away from all this writing and teaching. And he appeared and said, "Oh, darling, I'm glad you're here. I want to introduce you to some." So he had me go and meet all these other elementals there, and also to learn about the ancestors of Hawaii. And the ancestors of Hawaii, they even have beings like dragons, the mo'o, that they pray to and that they think are their ancestors. So it was a combination book in a way. It was a book of elementals and Lloyd, so it's fun, and it's also talks about my own lineage, and part of mine through my mother is this water dragon.
A water dragon.
A water dragon.
So what does it do for you to know that? How does it transform anything? How does it aid anything in your life?
Oh, that's a good question. It helps me to understand my mother better, for a start. We had a very good relationship, but it really deepens my understanding of her. And I felt a kinship with the Hawaiian people, very much so, after going there and learning more about the ancestors. And they were very generous in sharing information with me. And I think anything that teaches us about our own lineage, Sandie, we were talking about the gene keys earlier and how learning anything about ourself is useful. And when you start looking at the idea of hybrids and lineage, we're not just looking at our physical DNA through our parents anymore. So I think there's levels. There's our physical DNA that we have to examine. And what does that mean? There's epigenetics, and tons of books written about epigenetics, which are the woundings that can get handed down. Then a deeper level is our past life lineage. And what past life lineages do we bring in? And then deeper than that is our hybrid lineage, which is really our real soul ancestry. So I like to examine our lineage on all levels, because I think all levels impact who we are and how do we unravel this package to manifest our gifts fully in the world.
Mm-hmm. Do you have a particular affinity? I mean, you say that you know, the water dragon, but is there any other form that you have an affinity with?
Yes, I do. As a child, I felt very aligned to mer people. I would go under the water in the wading pools when I was just a toddler. And I used to think, I can breathe under here. I'd lie under there and I'd think, I can breathe under here. I just know I can. And yet anybody watching me sitting outside, was also aware that if I tried to do it, it could be disastrous and they would panic. And so I didn't do it. But I feel, yes, this, and through my father, I feel this mer lineage. And yeah, which is also this water lineage, the water dragon.
Well, it's interesting how more and more people having regressions are talking about not having had a life on this planet. And, you know, so they were something else, somewhere else, and they're accessing those memories and that information during regression. And it's becoming more prevalent now.
This is wonderful, isn't it? Gosh, it's wonderful. Probably it couldn't happen 4 decades ago because people would have been sent off to be fixed.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So do you get people writing to you after reading hybrids and going, oh my gosh, I've just discovered I'm
a dada.
Something, a dragon. I have dragon energy. I have, you know, you and I have talked about my association with dragons and you know, the surprise to me after living where I live for more than 5 years to suddenly realize 6 months or a year ago that actually the village I live in has a massive association with dragons. So yeah, so I guess that tells me I'm probably, you know, that's my affinity.
Yes, yeah, and maybe mer people too. Who can tell?
Who knows? Who knows? I mean, it is such a fascinating topic, and I have heard before from channels and people who talk about the elementals and their roles here and how upset they've been because we haven't been working with them in the way that, you know, they need to work with us.
Yes, exactly. And the time is coming. Our frequency is rising en masse. And we are breaking through into these astral realms.
Mm.
And as you say, more and more people are seeing these other lineages. It's wonderful.
Very interesting for sure. Okay, one last question. If you were a book, what words would be used on the cover to describe the contents?
If I were a book?
Yeah. You know, sometimes you get books and they have things like surprising or, sensational, or I don't know, things that would describe the contents of the book. What would describe you?
Dive deep into the unknown.
That's brilliant. Yeah, that would definitely be on any book that you were the subject of. Good one. So, Tanis, would you just tell us before we leave where people can find more information about you and just a little brief bit about your International Institute for Transformation?
Certainly. Well, they can go on Amazon, of course, if they're interested in any of the books. But if you want to go to my website, we've got one at www.tanishelliwell.com. And that's my personal one. And the Leprechaun's got a page there. And then for the International Institute for Transformation, which is where we offer a lot of courses through, we've got one coming up, Visit Magical Realms, in January, where I'm going to take people on a tour of these. Then you could go to myspiritualtransformation.com. So that would be www.myspiritualtransformation.com.
And what will we find there? Your story or other people's stories?
You will find how to go to Magical Realms, my invitation, a few videos on it. You can get on our newsletter. You can even get our free package, which is, on spiritual transformation, so that people can get started for free on finding out how their spiritual transformation is going. It's very thorough.
Tanis Helliwell, thank you so much for adding your 10 best list of spiritual books to the No BS Spiritual Book Club's library of recommendations. We really appreciate your contribution.
Well, I thank you. Thank you so much. And it's just been such a treat being with you today, Sandie. Just loved it.
Likewise. Thank you, Tanis. So that's it for this week. I'm Sandie Sedgbeer. I'll be back at the same time next week with another 10 best interview for the No BS Spiritual Book Club. Until then, it's goodbye from me. And thank you again to Tanis Helliwell.